halfway between what we would have been with the terrible regressive tax system and where we were with the income state, with the income tax surcharge. For me, that campaign began really in some ways 3 years ago when I started to run for city council, backed largely by a set of activists, the Working Families Party, set of labor unions, community groups in my district, and people who had already been working together, but who were willing to kind of get in the mess of a local city council race and a bunch of other city council races around the district. And so when a few of us won our elections, we asked this question. Justin had said, hey, there's a lot of folks in the city council who are progressive, but we haven't been able to channel that power. We ought to form a caucus. So we've got a group of people together that act in concert, that plan together, that try to do things together. A dozen of us formed the Progressive Caucus, co-chaired by Melissa Mark-Viverito, a council member from East Harlem, and we picked a few issues early on. If folks are interested in the living wage campaign we're fighting, in the paid sick days campaign, and some of our work on stop and frisk, happy to talk about it afterwards, but we very quickly picked kind of progressive taxation, making sure that the New York State millionaires tax did not sunset, and connecting that to our budget fights at both the city and state level, where we continue to lose teachers through attrition, raise class size, cut many, many services that people need. We started organizing early on. About a year ago at this time, right after President Obama kind of gave in on the fight to end the Bush-era tax surcharge on high-income earners, on millionaires, we worked with some people in this room, including Justin, to say if they don't need that money in Washington, we sure need it here. Did sort of an online campaign, got hundreds of people to weigh in, and then started to work on this year's campaign with a lot of people. And we only played a very small role, but a few good things happened along the way. Yeah, great. A labor and community coalition came together. 1199, the New York Communities for Change, our Acorn inheritor, the Working Families Party, some other parts of labor, and some more grassroots activists formed the thing that was called Strong for All. That's what's become 99% NY, but they formed this labor community coalition. Like has been formed many times before. We've tried that a lot of times. We met a lot with them throughout the spring, where it was clear the millionaire's tax wasn't going to be on the table in the state budget fight, but we wanted to get it loudly there in the city budget fight, even though it's really a state issue. And I do think we only had pretty modest success. This was sort of, back in the Tea Party days before Occupy, I think, turned more focus on inequality in the country. But I do think we managed where the state debate went down quietly and without any reference to these questions, really. At the city, the fact that we started to there were a whole range of more in-your-face actions, the May 17th set of actions where we marched about 20,000 people around Lower Manhattan, the set of press conferences we did, some online action, certainly started to raise attention. And I also think for people in New York City started to really connect teacher layoffs and rising class size to the millionaire's tax. So there's both a tax fairness and kind of income inequality issue, and just a real stark, class size is rising. There's more and more kids in classes of 30 or more. So my favorite action of all this fall was a cupcake action where a lot of parents and students from my district joined with other folks who had been doing Occupy for Education and Strong for All, and went up and sold cupcakes outside the governor's office, trying to raise the $1.5 billion that the expiration of the tax was going to cost us. Lots of people started to get involved. Now, all that said, without Occupy, the millionaire's tax would be expiring on December 31st. I feel fairly certain of it. We had built a great coalition. We had labor. We had, a lot of elected officials in Albany and down here. But I think the governor felt relatively immune to all of that pressure and just didn't see the need to cut a deal. And I do think you have to give Occupy Wall Street very substantial credit for changing that a little bit. I think it was very important that he didn't want to go down as Governor 1%. He didn't like it when Occupy LA protesters protested outside the event, donors event he was holding for marriage equality out in Los Angeles. And so I think a whole set of things together, and I don't have a precise formula on it, brought about a moment where it made sense for him to work on striking a deal. I won't go into the specifics of the deal and kind of how it got cut in Albany and what Speaker Silver and the Senate and what everybody got. So it leads us to a moment where a transaction got made. Again, a lot better than nothing, a lot less than we might have wanted. And for me, the question is, there are a lot of new things in place from where we started. The caucus is in place, 99% NY is in place. Good relationships between Occupy, labor, and elected officials exist that I think are based on people doing the things they do, not trying to do something they don't do, not arguing about which is better. The millionaire's tax is really good because the big messages of 99% happen to resonate very well with a really concrete and specific policy campaign, and that sure is not always the case. And so when there's a bigger gap or you're working on issues that don't have that, I think there's a lot of questions. But I think it sets us up for that question, which is, all right, where next? How do you not say was that a good or bad deal, but make sure we keep deploying all of those elements together so we build more power for the next fight.
Great, thanks, Brad. One of the things about that is that these organizations, these caucuses, are starting to work together and lost. I mean, essentially, the budget deal that happened in the spring was a pretty bad budget deal for progressives. And this seems like an advance. In part, the Occupy movement needed to change it. When New York was having a budget deal that was disappointing progressives, the Connecticut budget deal made a lot of progressives say, that looks a little bit better than what's going on here in New York. We'll see how much you agree with that, but it had that sense that somehow Connecticut was maybe further along on pushing some of this agenda even without the Occupy movement. Chris Donovan, as Speaker of the Connecticut House Assembly, is it? The Connecticut House
of the General Assembly.
Of the General Assembly, was obviously part of that conversation. He's now running for Congress in Connecticut as well, but he has been part of moving forward a progressive agenda at a time where we see around the country the conservatives doing a great job pushing their agenda, blocking their progress, and that some has been made in Connecticut. So I'm curious, from what you heard about Brad's story, how much of that resonates with what has been working in Connecticut, or what else can you come and teach us New Yorkers about what we can be doing a little bit better to further a progressive agenda?
Well, I'm going to go back a few years. When I was first elected to the General Assembly, well, before that I was a union organizer and a community organizer, so I entered the General Assembly as an organizer. And we had, previous to that, a big tax fight, and there were caucuses, moderate caucuses of the Democrat Party, progressive caucuses. And the Speaker who came in then said, we're going to disband all those caucuses because it just creates fights and everybody's fighting each other. In some ways, that was a great opportunity for a lot of people. By not having a progressive caucus, an official progressive caucus, a lot of us progressives decided we'll just take over the caucus. So that's what we did. If we're a progressive caucus, we'd always be right and we'd always lose. But if we were the caucus, we would win. So I'm going to just read a few things we won over the years by winning the caucus. Paid sick leave, Connecticut Dream Act, minimum wage increased 12 times, transgender civil rights bill, same-sex marriage, public financing, protecting Medicare and Medicaid funding, earned income tax credit, domestic violence laws, cleaning up pollution plants, and passing a bottle bill, and passing a millionaire tax. We did all that. By people who are not considered progressives, they voted for that, because that's what the caucus was all about, and that's what they cared about. So the question is organizing. And the anecdote I'm going to talk about is a budget previous to this. We had a Republican governor in the midst of the recession where she came out and said, no taxes, no taxes, no taxes, it's cuts, cuts, cuts. And the cuts were on all those things we cared about. Education, seniors, etc. So I'm the Speaker of the House, and I said, all right, we can have this discussion where it's governor saying cuts and Democrats saying taxes. Right? What a great message to the public out there. Cuts, everybody says, yes, there's cuts. Democrats say taxes. We lose. We lose in that fight all the time. You know, how many people here want to pay more taxes? Nobody. How many people think there's some cuts out there? Everybody, right? So that's the fight. So I said, oh, we're not going to do that. Let's go on the road. Let's use organizing. So we went to my town. I met with, she was going to cut family resource centers, things for kids. We had parents from all over the area come there and descend there. I'm the Speaker of the House, so guess what? Cameras come. So I'm there with senior citizens. I'm there with kids and mothers and legislators. Legislators get a boost. They're in the press. The people are getting a boost because they see somebody working with their issues. And now the public is understanding, oh, she's talking about cutting kids? Yes, that's right. She wanted to cut kids. Let's walk over here to the library. We have people who are librarians. We have friends of the library, patrons of the library. Legislators, again. We did that in my town. We did it in other towns. Went to mental health facilities. And people's talking about mental illness, and the parents and relatives of mental illness were there. Other legislators would come because the speaker's coming. They showed up. We went there. We went to library. I told you about libraries. Senior centers, where they're going to cut dial-a-ride and cut prescription coverage. I set up this group called Children in a Recession. How are we going to deal with children in a recession? We went around the state and had hearings on children in recession. Marion Wright Edelman came and said, hey, this is a great idea because it talks about children in recession, and really it's saying to the governor, why are you cutting services for children? So we did that all over the state. All over the state. And then all of a sudden you heard, oh, you know what, the library, that's off the table. We're not going to cut that anymore. Oh, you know, the transit stuff, we're not going to raise that anymore because we're getting press and press and press. And finally it culminated with, we had 200 kids, little kids this big, balloons and bullhorns, little kids trying to hold up the bullhorn. And I get a call from the governor, and she goes, all right, enough. So it's a Republican governor. We got all the programs she wanted to cut. I'm going to say all of them. I mean, there was some trimming, but pretty much everything that she wanted to cut, dental care for seniors, prescriptions for the mentally ill, all of that restored. But we had to pay for it. So a Republican governor agreed, after all this, to raise taxes on millionaires. That's what we got. We were able to get a Republican governor to raise taxes on millionaires. That's what we were able to do. We're trying to get a Democrat president to raise taxes on millionaires. We're trying to get a Democrat governor to raise taxes on millionaires. We were able to get a Republican governor to do that because we organized, and we organized. Now, the press wasn't great. The press kept doing that, the mainstream press. Why don't they have a deal? Why don't you have a deal? Well, we would have had a deal if I'd given in to everything, but I wasn't going to do that. You know, we could have used a little bit of the other press, saying to the mainstream press, you don't get it. They don't have a deal because if they have a deal, they're cutting seniors and kids and education and all that and hurting the cities and towns. So by fighting, we were able to win. So the seniors got it, and but the cynicism was there. Oh, look, see, they can't get together. They can't work it out. I think the big story was those who knew, we raised taxes on millionaires and we saved the program. So then when we have a new governor come in, the new governor, a Democrat, all those other things that we almost passed before, like opening up our state employee health care plan to cities and towns, we were able to pass that. The transgender one, we had passed that several times. We were able to pass that. And again, the DREAM Act, which was something we had passed and she had vetoed twice to allow children of immigrants or immigrants themselves to go to state universities at state prices. We passed that with this governor. So all that work we had done up to this point worked. But you know what I'm saying is, again, it wasn't the Progressive Caucus. It was the House Democrats. It was the Senate Democrats. They didn't see themselves as progressives. Some of the people still say to this day, Chris, I'm a moderate and I'm a conservative. Well, you just voted for all these things. And they feel good about them because, you know what, they voted for them and nothing happened. I mean, they still got reelected. I helped them get reelected. Our colleagues helped them get reelected. Progressive groups said, you know, he's not the most progressive guy, but you know, he votes right. We're helping that person out too. So the whole goal is to win the votes, is to get in Connecticut 76 votes in the House and 19 in the Senate. I don't care who they are, but if we get them through, and now they voted for that, and they said, you know, I voted for same-sex marriage. That wasn't so bad. So when transgender came around, what the heck, I'll vote for that too. It wasn't that right. It wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't that big a deal because they had voted for one and they moved on. And you know, before same-sex marriage, we did civil unions, and I mean, they went to court and we fought that. So all that stuff, it's constantly organizing and bringing people together and putting that experience out. And you know, I think especially in the world right now, if people are looking for authenticity, if you have a politician and people and an issue in one place, and there's that discussion that goes on, you can use the social media to spread that out and kind of break down that mainstream press. I was down here at Occupy Wall Street, and there was a guy standing with a hard hat said all politicians are crooked and blah, 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 blah. You know, and I was there mainly to listen, but I finally said, you know what, I got to be engaged a little bit. And I said, we're in Connecticut. We have public financing. We don't get our money this way. To run for office in Connecticut, for state senate, all the way up to government, for state rep, all the way up to the governor, you raise a certain amount of money, of less than $100 each, and then the state gives you a rest. State reps, we raise $5,000, less than $100, and then the state gives us $25,000. So we raised $35,000 raised. Our governor was able to run for governor against a multimillionaire by raising $250,000, and the state gave him whatever, five something million to run. He ended up with $6 million. We were able to do that in a way, and we had that discussion right there in the corner. Somebody said, "What about lobbyists? They should all be killed." Well, I think that violates the various laws. But hey, I was a nonprofit lobbyist too. I was a good guy, and I asked people, legislators, for money instead of giving them money. But well, we said no. We actually went to court and said we couldn't stop them from doing it, but they're limited to give $100 like everybody else. That's it. That's all they can give. And so by doing that public financing, that enabled us change the dynamic within the General Assembly so that the new legislators who come in, they don't know how to raise money the old-fashioned way. The only way they know how to raise money is to get money from their constituents and then get a match from the state. So when they see a lobbyist, it's pretty much, well, convince me. Is this a good idea or not?
Okay.
That's it.
Great, thank you, thank you. In both, both of you spoke to times where there was either a success that was clearly built on these continued efforts. That taking advantage of a moment that was there because you've been building up this momentum, keeping whatever the caucus is called, keeping them together. The willingness to fight, I think you both brought up. Now, Darcy has been working on the willingness to fight in D.C. over the years, trying to get our progressive caucus in Congress as strong and promoted and informed and out there as possible. And she's been carrying on the fight in other ways herself. As a candidate for Congress, she's going to be running in Washington State this year. And I first met Darcy in 2007 in Chicago. Before Netroots Nation was called Netroots Nation, it was called Yearly Posts. And while a lot of candidates for office didn't quite know if they wanted to be associated with a group of bloggers, Darcy was proud to be there and proud to be connecting and reaching out and talking with us about these issues. So she's a longtime Netroots Nationer. And I'm curious, Darcy, from Washington, D.C. and Washington State, what have you seen that has helped create progressive change? What kind of power, political or otherwise?
So I'm playing, in some ways, the contrarian on today's panel. How many of you right now, thinking about the national landscape since 2000, think progressives are winning? Hey, look, not a single hand. How many of you think that our political system nationally is working as it should? Also, not a single hand. I have spent an additional brief bit of context. Before I decided to become a politician, I was a software programmer. It's a bit of a transition. But the taking apart big, complicated things to understand how they work and then how to rebuild them so that they work better is what I do. It's what I've always done. And so when I went to D.C., it was with the intent of figuring out why and how our political system was broken so that it would become possible for us to fix it, because it clearly needs to be fixed. I spent 2.5 years working with the Congressional Progressive Caucus. It was a fairly traumatic 2.5 years, starting in the beginning of 2009, and we made some progress. But I actually want to question the entire premise of the panel, because the panel is predicated on the idea that political power is, in some sense, the only kind of power we should be talking about. And my conclusion at this point is that our single biggest failing as progressives is that we tend to think as though political and economic power are the only kinds of power that exist. And that's what causes us to lose. So, there are 6 types of power, as near as I can tell. I'll give you the taxonomy. You can use it later. You don't even have to credit me. Political power, who makes the rules and what are the rules? Economic power, who owns what? Military or police power, on whom can you enforce your rules? Cultural power, what stories do we tell ourselves about who we are? Moral power, what stories do we tell ourselves about who we're supposed to be? And communicative or connective power, how many people can we reach? How broadly can we spread our message? Why does this matter? Well, one other thing. Those 6 types of power are all fungible. If you have enough of any one of them, you can trade it for the others. So why does this matter? Okay, so we're losing on the political power front, and we're losing on the political power front because we long ago lost on the economic power front. The right wing in this country, what I like to think of as the Ayn Randians, managed to rig the markets so that they no longer functioned. In fact, they were able to internalize profits while externalizing costs and risks, and then remove all judicial ability to interfere with that and buy the Congress to further rig the rules in their favor. We do not, in fact, have a free market capitalist society right now. We have crony capitalism in some very, very important markets. And then they used that to buy political power. And yet, in an environment like that, we've been able to make progress on a very small number of issues. Let's take gay marriage. We have had gay marriage pass all over the country, but kind of more importantly, the public support for gay marriage. In Washington State, when I started running in 2005, public support for gay marriage in Washington State was at 41%. It is now at about 53% in 5.5, 6 years. 53%, right? How many people here know who I mean when I say Kurt Hummel? How many people here have ever seen a television show that has a gay character on it? How many people here have ever seen a television show that has a sympathetic gay character on it? Somebody that you'd really like. The LGBT movement has done a fantastic job of changing the stories that people tell themselves about who they are, so that every American now feels like they have a gay best friend, whether they actually do or not. And it changed their attitudes about things like gay marriage, which allowed the space for us to make political progress. It was a very different, they've got people in Hollywood literally vetting the scripts and pushing back if the show doesn't deal with these issues in the way that they would like, and that's incredibly constructive for us. Anybody here seen the new Muppets movie? So I took my 8-year-old son. New Muppets movie was written actually by Nicholas Stoller, blogger Matt Stoller's brother. So it's all a little family thing. Hugely controversial among the right-wing Republicans, because the basic storyline is this greedy oil businessman wants to tear down the old Muppets theater and drill for oil, and the Muppets get together to save their theater, right, as a collective action. And so the right wing is actively attacking it because it teaches kids, it sets the cultural norm in a way that they don't like. If we talk about the Occupy Wall Street movement, Occupy Wall Street hasn't been about electing people. It hasn't been about votes. It hasn't been about engaging in violence to violently overthrow a government, right? It has been about changing the stories that people have in their heads about what kind of a country we are and what kind of a country we are supposed to be. Occupy Wall Street changed the national discussion from deficits to income inequality by changing the stories in people's heads. As progressives, we can do a tremendous amount of good by thinking not just about political and economic power, but about how we can apply cultural power. Because we actually have all the good comedians and writers, and Justin, right? Like, has a whole troupe of comedians. We have all the good people on our side. Hollywood's all on our side, right? Cultural power. Moral power. It turns out that one of the basic tenets of every major religion on the planet is the idea that reducing the suffering of others is kind of the definition of good. And increasing the suffering of innocent others, especially when it's for personal profit, is sort of the definition of evil. We do have a political party in this country whose philosophy is the definition of evil. And that's to our advantage. I love having discussions with evangelical conservative Christians. Love nothing. Sign me up. Because all I have to do is pull out the red letter portions of the Bible.
Surely.
Feed the hungry. Care for the poor. And when they say what they have been programmed to say, which is, oh, well, that's about private action, not government. I say, we live in a democracy. Your vote is one of your actions.
2 minutes first.
Your vote is one of your actions. And the Bible doesn't distinguish between the actions you take with your hands and the actions you take with your vote. You're morally culpable for both. These are arguments that we can win. These are people that we can win over by changing the stories in their heads or reminding them of the stories they already have in their heads that they're not living up to. And then we can do all of the political stuff that we need to change the rules and fix the economy. But as progressives, we're going to make a whole lot more progress if we start by changing the stories. Thank you.
So, round of applause. So, I'm going to ask a quick follow-up to each of you, and then I want to open it up to comments and questions. But I'll start with Darcy. Totally compelling and exciting. So why then are you running for office? And I don't mean to give us your campaign stump necessarily, but how are you going to create change? Why are you choosing the route of political change and political power as your avenue for creating change?
So I said that I'm in the business of fixing systems, big complicated systems. It's what I do. One of the systems which is broken right now is the United States Congress. We as progressives talk a lot about how the electoral system is broken, and we talk a lot about the need for campaign finance reform, and that's true. But the rules inside of Congress are also rigged against us. And some of the rigged rules are hard for us to fix, but some of them are really straightforward. So, how many of you think lobbyists have disproportionate influence in Congress? Too much, right? Yeah. That's a majority opinion in this country. Most people think that that's because they make campaign contributions. That isn't actually why. I make campaign contributions. I do not have disproportionate influence in DC because I make campaign contributions. The biggest reason lobbyists have disproportionate influence in DC, in Congress, is because in every single House office, we'll take the House for example, you have somewhere between 4 and 6 legislative staffers who work on policy. Average age of those legislative staffers is about 26. They're typically assigned 4 to 6 policy areas each, big policy areas each. They might understand something about one of those policy areas. And there are constantly votes and things that they have to deal with. So when some lobbyist comes in and says to them, your boss has to take a vote tomorrow on this bill and you don't know anything about it, but here's what you need to know. Here are the talking points. Here are the key facts, here's how your boss should vote, and that's the only information they have. Then what do you think they take to their bosses? Now, it didn't used to be the case that it was this dysfunctional. Newt Gingrich intentionally broke Congress. In 1995, one of the things that he did when he took the speakership was he made it illegal for congressional offices to pool their resources to hire staff. They used to pool their resources to create internal think tanks that specialized in specific areas of policy. They would have a handful of staffers who specialized in nuclear non-proliferation and arms control that would be shared by 40 or 50 or 60 offices. So anything that had anything to do with nuclear non-proliferation and arms control, these staffers would vet. They would go back to the members. They would say, this is what's really going on. Here's what you should do. Here are the finer details of what needs to be fixed. Gingrich wanted to centralize power in the Speaker's office and disempower the rank-and-file members, so he banned the internal think tanks. You know what it takes for us to get them back? A simple rules change, right? 20, 25 incoming freshmen in the House of Representatives going to soon-to-be Speaker Pelosi before the first day and saying, we have these 5 little rules changes we'd like you to make Because we want to be able to vote for you for speaker, but we'd also like to be effective at our jobs. And we could have those rules changes. I'm going to Congress because I want to fix the place. Engineer.
I should note, I actually don't know whether Netroots New York is 501c3 or 501c4. It is not a partisan event. And so while you're certainly welcome to talk more with these candidates afterwards about their actual candidacies, we're not here endorsing them, we're here hearing why they would run and their visions and ideas. And so, having just asked Darcy about why she's running, Chris, I want to come to you for a second. You've seen the sort of battles that you fought in Connecticut over time, be able to move the ball forward. And now you're thinking about taking a step to a new arena in a different place, where maybe you could be one of those 20 or 25 and help with rule changes. Do you see any, from your organizing background, do you see any issue right now that Congress could be ready to move more progressively on, that actually has some of that groundwork, some of that momentum ready if it could push forward, that we might see as the next fight that you
Well,
want
I
to take
think
on?
the biggest thing is, things change quickly around here these days. Was it the Wizard of Oz, something like that, a line like that. Things sure change around here a lot. 2008, we were mile high, right? We were like, the Republicans are going, what the hell happened to us? Right, 2006, we thought that was an aberration. 2008, look at that. We have a black president, United States of America. We were thrilled. This is great. This is everybody, you looked at people throughout the United States, people were smiling, they're happy, things are going. And somehow we lost that. We lost that momentum somewhere along the way. In some ways, I think that's out there. People really want to believe in their government. They stand up, they take the Pledge of Allegiance, they care about this country, they want it to work, they want to believe in politicians, they want to believe in government, but they're not they're not getting it. And we have to show them, we have to work. I think what we have to say, hey, we're on your side, we're working with you. So one of the reasons why I'm running is I've been fighting for people, for families all my life, and right now, Congress needs people who are fighting for families. I say to families, I'm with you. I'm with you. Social Security. We have people running for president saying Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. We have people running for president saying, let's get rid of Medicare. Everybody, of the middle income and working people, they're like, Social Security and Medicare, what's going to happen to my parents, to my kids? What's going to happen to me if I get sick? They're all baby boomers like Medicare. Whoa, I'm almost there. Or I am there. Hands off that. We have presidential candidates who are saying let's ditch that, and then we have the president say, hey everybody, there's high unemployment. How about we pass this bill on jobs? We will create jobs throughout the state of Connecticut. Republicans say no. I think we're primed to say to everybody, hey, you know what? How about for jobs, Social Security, Medicare? Those are just keeping those simple things out there. They're universal, accepted by the people of the United States. I think right now we're primed. If we don't jump on that and just have those three signs with us at all times, just keep saying that over and over and over again. Because what do those things say? We can create jobs that people can have a good way of life. That's what they're saying about jobs. And we can have health benefits. That's good. People say, Social Security, we're going to take care of the senior citizens because taking care of our senior citizens is a good value of who we are. And we care about Medicare because health care should be something, and Medicare, as we know, is a single-payer health care system that's available for people. Those three things are the progressive movement right now. And if we don't jump on them, we're missing a really big opportunity that the Republicans are handing it to us on a platter.
Right. Now, Brad, two of the other fights that you mentioned, paid sick leave, which stalled last year, living wage, which is being fought now, I think fit into what Darcy was describing in an interesting way. You didn't have the political power on either one, obviously. Or I shouldn't say, I don't mean like, of course you didn't. There wasn't an obvious source of political power. You had a strong mayor system with a mayor saying no on both counts. You had a speaker who had some ambivalence on both counts. You certainly don't have economic power, so you relied on cultural and moral power pretty heavily in both of those fights. Does that resonate with your experience of where we are on the living wage fight, and how do those other sort of powers, how can they help move this fight forward? What's the next step on the living wage?
So the only thing I would say in response to Darcy is I guess I just don't see it as sort of first and second. It's obvious those are realms of power in which we have to move forward, and you need diverse strategies, and there are people really good at making movies, and there are people really good at preaching the gospel, and there are people good at getting out and knocking doors and electing candidates, and we need to be doing all of those things, and I don't think it's valuable. I think in some ways it's like if you care about this set of goals, go where your passion is and the thing you think you're good at, and stay in touch with some of the people that do the other things so you can work together most effectively. I mean, on the living wage campaign, I don't know, it's just 3 weeks ago, there were probably 3,000 people filled Riverside Church for probably the most moving event I've been at in a while, and that includes a lot of the Occupy stuff. So there were 3,000 of us packed into this church on the Upper West Side, mostly people of color. Black preacher after black preacher with like a few rabbis and imams thrown in for some diversity. Ben Jealous from the NAACP, a statement from the Archbishop, and then like they let a few of us go up. And so there's no doubt that the sort of, one really interesting thing there is that campaign has mostly been led by the RWDSU, the Retail Workers Union, and somehow they made like a marriage with a set of progressive black ministers and other religious leaders that gave a kind of energy and moral power to that campaign that I think surprised everyone. But for that, I don't think it would still be a lot. Like, I really do think were it kind of the unions and the Progressive Caucus and usual suspects, there's no chance that would be moving forward. And the fact that it has sort of caught wind, in this case, not only, but in this case in the churches, has given it a second kind of wind. I don't know whether we're going to get there on either of those in the next 2 years in the Bloomberg administration. I hope so. We have to keep pushing on both, and there are overlapping but different coalitions that are doing it and trying a range of message work, a range of real bare knuckles political work. It may not be lost on people. They had maybe this year was 3,000 people. Last year was probably 2,000 people that came out. And it was at a church in Harlem, and a council member there, Inez Dickens from Harlem, got up and said she supported the living wage. People may have seen her op-ed a week or two ago saying, you know what, I changed my mind. I don't support the living wage anymore. So I don't know. There needs to be some brass knuckles political work as well. So I'm hopeful. But, I want to fast forward to our next election for 1 second here. I'm not running for Congress in 2012, but I do hope everyone in the room will help in our campaign in 2013 to turn New York back in a more fundamentally progressive direction. Hopefully by then we'll have passed both living wage and paid sick days and be on to several of the other things Chris had on that list after that. But there are a lot of things we want, and I hope people will join us to do two things. One, half the seats in the city council are going to be open in 2013, and many of those are seats where there is a majority of people believe the set of things we're talking about here. So if you live in one of them, think about whether you want to run. If you live near one of them, help us find good candidates for those seats, and then get ready to help us do the organizing, to knock the doors, to raise the money, because we have a good, very good system at New York City, although not quite maybe as good as Connecticut, so we'll need to help them raise some money too. And anybody that's interested in that, talk to me afterwards, and Mary Tech, who's the staff member of the Progressive Caucus, is here. I do think we have some vision work to do as well. I don't know where this fits into the power scheme, but I think we lack a little bit of a compelling vision for the city that is both progressive, that it's about equality and about neighborhoods and about inclusion, but also compelling that it's vibrant and prosperous and the city will function and you will want to live there. And I do hope that folks in the Netroots world can help with that, because I think some of our collective imagination about equality is like built on an image of America in the 1950s and 60s. It was more equal then, it was less unequal, but it's not where we are. We don't have the same big companies and the same big unions. We're not going to achieve a better spread of income or a fairer tax system in the same ways. We've got to live in a 2000s world where things are moving faster, where income is generated in different ways, where demand is structured in different ways. And I think the places in New York where things are happening that are interesting that are not regressive, are some of the things that are happening with the way our streets and our transportation is being restructured, with what's happening in social media and on the web and in technology, and thinking about an economy and a city that has sort of that energy, but also is really deeply committed to equality and to sharing the benefits of it better. We have some work to do. I only just painted a couple of dots in a picture. But I think we need a much clearer one if we want to go to people and say, this is the New York City you want to live in. So vote for these people and support this set of things. And there's a lot of work to do there. We need help there too. So get involved in that as well.
Great. I want to take 3 comments or questions together and then ask the panelists to respond however they want so we can get more ideas out there. Yes, and just introduce yourself.
Hi. This is for the speaker and the councilman. I work, among other things, with the Real Rent Reform campaign. You know my committee. And I think the problem in New York, and apparently not as much in Connecticut, is that the 10,000 pound gorilla in the room sitting on the city council's ability to do what it probably would do if it could is Albany, which has been described accurately as one of the 2 most dysfunctional legislatures in the country. I don't know if you have any kind of relationship with Shelley Silver, your counterpart in New York, but the famous 3 men in a room enables, and Governor Cuomo is becoming more and more obviously a dictator who the 3, they sit down, they decide what's going to happen, they tell their caucuses what to vote.
Great.
Any ideas or thoughts on how we can try to change that dynamic? And if possible, return home rule on housing, at least, to the city.
Great. And again, I'm going to take 2 more questions, then you can respond to whichever ones strike you the most. Yes?
I was just wondering how individuals on the panel deal with, they talk with maybe more conservative members of their representative bodies that talk about any kind of pro-worker policy, and they come right back and say it's going to destroy the economy. I was just wondering how you deal with that on a personal level and how we can deal with that messaging more generally.
Terrific. One last comment?
Well, really a question.
Question, yeah.
And, Darcy mentioned like lobbyists and the influence of lobbyists. And what you see oftentimes is like, people getting into politics really for economic benefit. Go do a couple terms in Congress or Senate, and then you can go and be, on K Street and make millions of dollars, or go like Newt Gingrich and lobby for this industry and that industry. Because it's sort of easy to say, like, but when you get there and then you're offered all of those money and what comes with that. I mean, how is there any talk about putting laws and legislation in place that actually prevent, Congress, people, senators, in doing that? And would that be something you all would be in favor of doing?
Great. So, a question about dealing with dysfunctional capitals, as well as sort of the perverse incentives, financial incentives, plus a question of how to talk to colleagues about labor in a way that doesn't sound like it's hurting the economy. Would anyone like to take a hack at any of those?
So with respect to Jaziri's question about lobbyists, the House and the Senate actually get to set their own rules, which means it's a simple majority vote, about who is allowed to lobby them and whether, for example, former staffers can use the revolving door, former members can use the revolving door to come lobby them. And so either the House or the Senate could, in a very straightforward way, preferably both, set a rule saying that no former member or former staffer can come lobby as a registered professional lobbyist for 5 years. That dramatically reduces the financial incentive to go through the revolving door. I would certainly favor such a rule. I think it's a tremendous problem in D.C., and that would be one of the things I would want to change.
Great. Brad, do you want to tackle the home rule question or the tensions between city and state?
I mean, it's certainly true that many of the things we would like to do at the city level, we can't do because all states have give cities what they have. I think what we need to do to keep pushing forward in Albany, and I think if you think of kind of the 3 big fights of the last year or two, you're certainly right that the rent laws are the one we did the least well on. I think if you think of the 0-yard line to the 100-yard line, that's probably about the 25. Now look, marriage equality passed in Albany, and none of us thought it was going to, and that was way down toward the end zone on the other side, and I'll put the millionaire's tax at about the 50-yard line. So those are all actually better than they, where we were for all the Pataki years was pretty glum. And we had this hope when we had a Democratic governor, state senate, and state assembly that we were going to be able to do better, and we tripped over our feet. We had some really bad allies, right? Some corrupt allies, right? And so you think, let's build a Big Ten, whatever. So I think for now, it is, the governor is very popular, and what he has shown is when we build very broad support, a loud and insistent campaign for progressive action, he's open to taking progressive action. So that seems like an open door to me. Let's keep going.
And Chris, do you want to speak to this question about speaking to colleagues about why being pro-labor doesn't mean being anti-economy? I mean, that's something you probably had to deal with.
Yeah, I deal with that like every day. I think the biggest thing, though, I'm going back to local is better. Right? As a legislator, I get emails galore. And, the people who send me the emails galore, somebody told them to send an email, and they send out select all, send to all, right? So we know that, too. So when I call them back and said, I get an email from you, who are you? Why are you calling me? You sent me an email. Why? What about? They don't even know they sent it. So legislators go, we know these are worthless. It's like the old petitions. Anybody else sign a petition, right? And you get a bunch. You know they're worthless. But if two people from my neighborhood came to me and said, vote for this, holy mackerel, there's a movement going on. That's all it takes. And we don't do that. We don't do that. One time I had a social service people in my room, and I said, hey, look, I'm getting beat up about cuts, about everything, every day. And I need some backing from myself and my colleagues that you're out there and you don't want these things cut. So can you get letters to the editor? Can you get them, and can you have some other people come in and talk to me about it? Well, they said, yeah, we're going to do it. These are activist friends I work with. So they came back a month later, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, and I said, okay, you know what? The good news is we had 5 letters in my local paper about all these different things. And they said, hooray! I said, yeah, and I, the Speaker of the House, got everyone. I called Joe, I got Mary, I got Michael, I got Charlie, I got them to write the letters. Where were you guys? Where were you guys just writing a simple letter to the paper? Who reads them? Senior citizens and legislators. They're the people, right? They read them. And so we read them. We run for that. Oh, look what happened. I just wrote that. And then, oh, okay, I forgot you wrote it. But at least it's there. It's something outside. So I think it's getting back to the labor thing. Sometimes there's people say, oh, we're against prevailing wage, it gets rid of jobs, etc. You have 2 carpenters show up to the house and say, I live in your neighborhood, I'm a carpenter. You're talking about cutting my wages? Legislators go, no, I don't. Because they vote for us. It's not the big, whatever, the ethereal idea of labor. It's people who live in our district who are voting for us, and I'm spending lots of money for them to pay attention to me. And now they show up and say, I want something from you. And I say, no, I'm going to say, yes, of course. Especially if it's something that I'm predisposed to be for. And if they talk about, I'm your neighbor, I live here, or I'm not your neighbor, I live in your town. I once had 4 calls in one day about an autism bill. I knew nothing about it. The next day, I went to the committee chair. She said, you're the 4th person to talk to me today. That bill's getting out, well, as is. I'm thinking 16 calls were made statewide. That's what happened.
Great. We only have a minute or 2 left, so I'm sorry that we can't take more questions, and I do want to end with enough time to get you to other sessions or come speak to our panels. But right before we break, if people want to know more about you, what websites do they go to? Darcy?
DarcyBurner.com.
DarcyBurner.com.
Chris Donovan for Congress?
Donovan
for Congress.
.com. DonovanforCongress.com.
I got to give you 3, sadly. So BradLander.com is mine. Progressives NYC.
NYCProgressives.com.
I got it backwards. NYCProgressives.com is the New York City Progressive Caucus. And we're doing a great thing here with 3 other council members called participatory budgeting that I didn't get to talk about, but it's totally cool. Go to pbnyc.org. Sorry,
No, that's great. Thank you all for joining us, and please come up and talk and afterwards. Thank you.
Come on, guys, get on the ball.
I do radio, and this was videotaping, and the sound is, you picked it up from here, that little tiny whatever.